SSP TV and the Hazleton Standard Speaker present Good Sports with Dave and Ken.
Welcome, everyone, to the Good Sports podcast and web series. I'm Ken Kara, SSP TV Sports Director, with Dave Seaman, Standard Speaker Sports Editor. And the gentleman with us today really needs no introduction, but since this is a podcast, if you're not doing the web series, we should introduce Fred Barletta Jr. He's the Athletic Director at the Hazleton Area High School, but so many titles. I mean, throughout your career, you've been a coach, you've been a teacher, you were in sports journalism for a number of years. And Dave, that's actually, I mean, we've been wanting to have Mr. Barletta on for a while now, but when I came to, one of my favorite things to do really is when there's a college signing at the high school, after everybody leaves, if you're there, Dave and Mr. Barletta, I just love to listen to the two of you talk about, hey, you'll bring up something, hey, this happened, hey, that happened, and the memories just fuel a ton of these great stories, and that's what we're hoping to get into here today. So, Mr. Barletta, thank you so much for being with us. It's the summer, so a little bit calmer now at the high school. It's a 6A high school, big athletic department, you're always busy, but is it a little bit more of a chill time now, or is it still kind of really busy?
It's still very busy. The only thing, Kenny, is that I'm guaranteed to be home for supper at 4 o'clock because there's no athletic events going on. And you don't have to worry about weather forecasts and whether or not you're going to be playing games and busing and scheduling. But other than that, there's a lot of paperwork. There's still a lot of preparation. I'm actually working on the spring sports schedules for this coming spring season. That's how far ahead you got to do this.
That's interesting. We're going to get into a lot of this here today, Dave. But we want to go way back. Let's start at the beginning. You grew up in the Hazleton area. I mentioned your Fred Barletta Jr. because I knew your father. You knew his father, and I remember him being a big baseball fan. Growing up, how much did that influence you, and how big were sports in your life back then? And what was it like growing up in Hazleton then?
Well, you're correct. My dad was a huge sports fan. Baseball was number one, but he also was a huge high school sports fan. So I went to my first high school football and basketball games when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. And that was always very important to my dad. And when I look at myself, it's amazing how baseball is still my favorite sport. And obviously high school sports has become very important in my life. So the influence there with my father was just huge.
What sports did you play growing up? What did you play, and were you good at any of them?
Playing and being good is two totally different things.
I totally understand that.
I mean, in the neighborhood, you played all the sports. But competitively in school, it was baseball and basketball. I can remember when I made the Greeby basketball team, and that was so big, Harmon Greeby, that you go home and you put the uniform on and look in the mirror like, I can't believe this. And same thing, I played varsity baseball for the late coach Ed Morgan. Some of the fondest and best memories I have were playing scholastic sports through my career. Notice I said playing. I was on the team. You're not going to find me anywhere in any all-star categories. I was the guy that literally had to fight just to make the team and was very proud of it. But I'm also very proud I played on some really good teams as well. And it wasn't easy to make teams, and it certainly wasn't easy to, for instance, in baseball, to be batting in the top of the batting order in those old Hazleton baseball teams.
Who were your contemporaries back then? Who were your peers? Who were on those teams, and what were the...
Well, I was fortunate enough in baseball that two of the pitchers that were on our Mountaineer baseball teams were signed to minor league contracts and played professional baseball. An awfully good left-hander, Gary Corrado, and Gary played on the collegiate level, and then, as I said, played, I think, 3 years in the minor leagues. Teammates with some guys that made it to the big leagues, including Ron Gardenhire, right, the player and manager. The other one was Ted Dameter, good right-hand pitcher. Gary had that unbelievable curveball, but Teddy can really pitch. He threw hard. Had to face them Legion ball because Teddy was from McAdoo. So when you got to the summertime, he was really a good pitcher. So was Gary. But they were two of the better ones. Neil Palumbo was probably our best long ball threat. Good left-hand hitter who took advantage of that short fence down at 22nd Street. So, I also Right ahead of me. I still, the good Russ Kanzler teams that just have come through, I've compared them to the 71 team. I was in ninth grade, so I was just a little bit, that's Joe Madden, for crying out loud. And you had Magic, Mike Mazenko, and you had Joe Gavio was the third baseman, Jeff Jones, Stevie Falatovich, Charlie Lyotte. These are some of the premier athletic names from that era. And it was a lot of fun and wanting to watch them and become part of that.
We all do this in sports journalism for a living, and Dave, I think sometimes we're victims of the moment, especially me. I was born in 1984, so no memories of the 70s, but you look at the Hazleton Area High School baseball team, the 2022 edition, you say, oh, best of all time. I just had the pleasure of interviewing at the D'Angelo Independence Day celebration Vernon Carey, who played for the Miami Dolphins, and before that, the University of Miami, and I always have to make a Penn State connection when I'm talking to a guy, and he played in 2001 for that great Miami team, and they came into Beaver Stadium that night game. It was the newly renovated Beaver Stadium, and they really beat Penn State pretty bad that night. But I asked him, I said, you were on arguably the greatest college football team of all time, and he said, you always have to put that in context, is basically what he said. He said, it's by era. He said, because it's different, and much like this. And I think it's interesting you mention those teams from the 70s, because it's important that they're remembered and brought up for how great they were back then.
I tell Dave this all the time. One of the things that's amazing when you think about it, at that time, there were no state playoffs except in basketball, not even in football, and certainly not in baseball. And that 71 team, they were, I often wonder, would have liked to have seen what happened if they would have got on the state level, because they had everything. They had, like this current edition the last 2 years, great pitching, deep pitching. They had 4 bona fide, really good high school pitchers. And you go around the infield and the outfield, just tremendous athletes. Like Charlie Lyotte was the first baseman, Hall of Fame caliber type guy. He played football down at Temple. He also was a 3-sport athlete. He was on the championship basketball team of 71. He was, batted either third or fourth, if memory serves correct. I mean, just a ton of real good athletes. I mean, Joe Madden was a shortstop and one of that deep pitching staff.
Why do you I love asking people this question. Why do you think baseball has become we've produced so many great athletes in baseball in this area? And sometimes, again, you're a victim of the moment, and you think of the current ones, the Biazzi brothers, and you had Russ Kanzler, and obviously Joe Madden's a manager who connects us to that 1970s era. But it sounds, when I hear stories from people, this isn't a new thing in the Hazleton area, that baseball has kind of been very important in the area for a long time and has produced a lot of talent in the sport. Do you think there's a reason? Was it just coaching, or has it maybe been on the upswing the past few years?
We've been blessed with a lot of good coaches. I don't think that's any question about that all over the area. But I always thought that the Hazleton area, it started with youth baseball, namely Little League. And Dave and I covered so many of those great District 18 tournaments. And unfortunately, it's not the same way today, and I'm wondering what's going to happen down there where a lot of the travel ball is taken over. But, you take a look with all of those names we're mentioning from back then right up to Russ Kanzler. First time I ever saw Russ was down at Whispering Willows Park on some really good Valley West Little League teams. The Biazzis over at Hazel Township. I just think that youth baseball has always been at the core here. So it'd be interesting to see going forward how that plays out. But you're correct. This has always been a good baseball town.
It seems like the people who've made it, too, they start giving back, like the Russ Kanzlers and that. And, Dave, I'll turn it over to you. But I wanted to say it was really cool when I was at the Valley West, the 10 to 12-year-old District 18 championship recently against Valley East. I was running around with all this equipment, and I looked over, and there's, one of the big products of Hazleton area baseball recently, Bryce Molinaro, cheering on Valley East where he played his baseball. So, Dave, go ahead, sir.
No, I was going to say, when growing up, we don't want to date ourselves, Freddie, but we played baseball during the day. You played morning, noon, and night during the summer. A lot of neighborhoods, you played against another neighborhood, and that was the game to play. I mean, we've always said it, for how great football we've had here at different times. Basketball obviously has been a big draw, but this has always been a baseball town, and that's something Fred and I have always agreed upon because you had players coming from the city of Hazleton itself, but also the outlying areas, the Beaver Meadows, the McAdoo, the Trestle Crescos, the West Hazletons, the Valley communities. There was always, outstanding baseball players. And when you talk about the district Little League tournament, that was always like, a bragging rights, because you were playing against a team, if you were from Hazleton, playing against the Cunningham team or a Freeland team or a Whitehaven team. And then you met the teams from Tamaqua and the Panther Valley area and the Nesquahoning, Summit Hill, Lansfords. And they were all outstanding players. So you got to put your pride on the line and your talent on the line. And back then it was only a single elimination tournament, and you prepared all month to play in that tournament, and it was such a thrill to play for that. And but I think it goes back to a lot more kids playing the game at a younger age, and those kids eventually grew up into junior high players and then high school players, and that's why we had a lot of outstanding high school baseball around here.
I remember there was 2 all-star teams in Hazleton, right? There was the National and the Hazleton National or Hazleton Americans. When I was growing up, and I even said, speaking of being bad at sports, I was terrible at baseball. When I first tried out for Little League, I ran first base, second base, and then, this is not to embellish, I ran to the outfield, climbed the outfield fence, and hid in my mother's minivan, and I never played baseball again. But all my friends were up at Coryell Stadium, so I went up there in the summer and I hung out with them in the press box, and it was a cool experience. One of my best experiences doing this job was being able, Mr. Barletta, to cover you and your dad you were broadcasting a game at Coryell Stadium together for, I forget what game it was. It was probably in the district tournament, but side by side there you both were calling the game, and I got some great shots. And just to sit in the background again and hear the banter between you and him, if you could talk about him a bit, and also what inspired you to want to get into sports journalism and do that end of it. If you can remember the third question, if not, I'll bring it back. Did you pull him into it then and then say, hey, do you want to do this with me?
Go back to what we talked about originally. You only play so long, and I certainly was not a player that was ever going to be getting the attention of professional teams. And when you get older and you still have this passion for the sport, you're either going to get involved in the coaching end of it, or in this case, in sports journalism. Something that most people wouldn't remember, when I was a young boy, there was a radio station there were 2 radio stations in Hazleton, and my father actually did some sports with WAZL, and the other station at that time was WTHT. They had their transmitter up on where the Laurel Hill Terrace is now. And I remember him doing that a little bit as a young boy, so that always was in the back of my head. When I went to college, I got involved with the college radio station, and within 2 years, they had me broadcasting sporting events up at East Stroudsburg. And I really enjoyed it. And when I came back to the Hazleton area and ended up in the teaching profession, it was a perfect thing. And originally, the very first sports journalism I got involved with was not radio, wasn't television. It was the print media. People don't recall this. No newspapers published on Sunday. And the big Sunday paper came out of Wilkes-Barre. It was called the Sunday Independent. And I saw that they were advertising for a sports stringer, really. And I put my name in, and I got interviewed by the late Don Zimmerman, and I was 24 years old. They hired me. And little did I know that was going to open up a whole nother avenue. And then when the WAZL thing came up, and then Channel 13, and those opportunities came, I was fortunate enough to be the person selected. And it's just been, it was never planned, but I always enjoyed it. When you mentioned about my dad, that was not my idea. We were broadcasting the Little League, and at that time, I believe I was broadcasting with Mike Hornack. And Mike gave it up, and they were looking who you were going to broadcast the Little League games with. And the late Rich Solo, who worked at WAZL as a program director, came to me and he said, I normally don't do this, but I have the guy. And I said, oh, who? And I'm waiting for this baseball name. And he said, Fred Barletta Sr. And I don't know about this. Like, how's that? And needless to say, that was actually called by the management at WAZL. And my only regret to it is I never was one to tape all the literally hundreds and hundreds of games I've broadcast. I don't have a tape of a one. I really wish I had one with my dad because I can't even describe how special that was.
I want to go back. We'll continue into your career, Mr. Barletta, but I thought of a question, Dave and Mr. Barletta, if you want to talk about. We were talking about Little League Baseball and the fact with travel leagues coming up. So often you hear, sports are so different now, and some people say, that's bad. Is it a bad thing, or is it just that things are different now and things are happening differently? And they might have, I don't want to say bad outcomes, but just different now. If you have all this travel ball, you're not having maybe the excitement and the rivalries that you used to have.
There's no doubt that's made a major impact now. People see travel ball as the way to the future. I mean, they're thinking down the line instead of letting kids be kids. I think that's one of my biggest concerns is you have travel ball tournaments for 7 and 8 year olds. And that's when they should be enjoying themselves, like I mentioned before, about going outside, being with their friends, and enjoying the great outdoors, enjoying a baseball game among friends. But now it's so structured and so rigid. You have that organized, go to a tournament this weekend. Well, you might play 3 games, but then if you lose 3 games, so what? Because then there's the next weekend, and you have another tournament. So it's just like you keep spinning your wheels and you keep going to games. That's just my opinion about it. Other people have benefited, and you certainly can benefit from playing more baseball. But my fear is like kids, if they start at an early age, they just burn out, and they have no use for the game as they get older. And I think we do see some of that in this day and age, and it's unfortunate, but it's certainly impacted when you see how many how little teams there are in the District 18 Little League tournament these days. Where are these kids? Are they playing travel ball? Are they doing anything? But again, call me an old fogey, but I just like the way it used to be. Unfortunately, I don't think it's ever going to go back that way. And I miss it. I really do.
Well, before Dave, anything else for Mr. Barletta before we take our first break and then we jump back?
No, I just I said I've had the great pleasure of working. We talked about doing Little League games. I worked some games with them actually. As a color commentator, the great Hazleton Township team from 1996, the team that played in the state tournament, was 1 game away from advancing to the regionals at Bristol, Connecticut. And if you remember that, I mean that seems like yesterday, but we go way back, and there are a lot of great memories, a lot of stories to tell, and I've been fortunate and blessed to be part of the ride with him, because we've enjoyed ourselves company together.
I would just have to quickly add to that, and I'm laughing because we're here with Kenny. Dave and I covered that together, and we were driving down to Newtown, Philadelphia, and we were so confident that team was going to Bristol, we pulled out the Red Sox schedule, and they were home at Fenway Park. We were making plans that in the downtime, we want to know how far was it we were going to Fenway Park. We were going to go watch a couple Red Sox games. And I'm laughing at that with Kenny sitting here. And, of course, it never happened.
Yeah, we'll get into talking about me being a big Red Sox fan, you being a big Yankees fan, Mr. Barletta. And that was did you say the Hazle Township team?
I'm a Dodger fan, by the way.
And yes, Dave is a Dodger fan as well. I always tend to forget the National League sometimes, Mr. Barletta. I apologize. And I shouldn't. Should not do that. And that was that Hazle Township team, correct, in the 90s. I remember I was, right around that age at the time. That was very exciting. We'll get back and we'll talk much more about Mr. Barletta's career, and also great stories you had from your sports journalism career, covering World Series, also working local sports, what it's like being an athletic director, and we'll talk some high school sports as well. We'll be right back. The Good Sports podcast and web series is brought to you by the Lehigh Valley Health Network. Welcome back to the Good Sports Podcast. Ken Carey here with Dave Seaman and also Fred Barletta. He is the athletic director at the Hazleton Area High School. Now, before when we first did the show, I should have did this more properly, but I said also, you've worked in sports journalism. You've been a head coach in high school. You've also as well been a teacher in the Hazleton Area School District. But throughout your career, you mentioned your radio experience. You were also sports director at SSP TV when Local News 13, I think, kind of first started, right? Like first one out of the gate, it was you and Ron Marchetti were the sports team.
Not quite. Originally, it started down, they were broadcasting from the third floor of the Standard Speaker building. And they were using a lot of at that time, there was a full stable of sports people working in that department. And between Dave and the late Bill Crooks and the late Ray Saul, they would alternate, and they would have the standard speaker guys doing a lot of the sports. Pat Ward was doing the news at that time, but the original SSP broadcasts, I don't know if it was 2 years, Dave might know better, he was there. It was when they moved over into the former Greco building that Mr. Lassant approached me, and I thought about it, and I took it, and was here for 17 years. And wonderful memories with that, wonderful opportunity, and but so not quite from the beginning.
I just remember, Dave, and I said I was going to save this till the end, my fanboy geek out moment, and I truly mean this from the bottom of my heart. This is a really cool moment for me to be sitting with both of you, because I grew up, Dave, I've told you the story several times, reading your work covering the Penn State football team in my local newspaper, and I thought that's amazing. And I started as an intern at SSP TV when I was 16, and I would come in, Mr. Barletta, and you'd be sitting at the desk, and I was so impressed by this. Rick Marticelli would come over, and Mr. Barletta would say, okay, well, here's this game, tonight, go get video, and then they would come back in. You had no scripts from my memory, and would just knew all the kids' names, got the plays down. It was one take, and just the knowledge. And then there'd be a scoreboard, and he would just see the scores and be able to go off. And then this guy had an RBI and celebrate our local athletes. It was incredible to see. And then, of course, I've had the pleasure to go out with you on a few stories and be your videographer. But you both were so generous to the younger generation coming up that I appreciate. I hope I could do that for the next generation as well. But doing that back then and being able, what I was always so impressed with, I think you both have this personality too, where you seem to get as excited as you did about covering Little League as when you were showing me pictures from the 1975 World Series. I mean, obviously there's a little bit different, but you seem like you have the passion to celebrate both.
All three of us, in that regard, what I did, what you guys are still doing, it's very important to realize, yes, national sports is still very important. People are passionate about the Phillies, and they're passionate about Penn State football, but in this community, it's still a community that values its local athletes and local sports. And I think you guys are wonderful at that. If I want to get an in-depth thing about a pro athlete, I'm going to go to one of the national media sources. If I want to know something about what's going on locally, I'm going to get it out of the standard speaker, or I'm going to get it off the television, local markets. So you have to be passionate about it. If you aren't, you're not going to last in this profession. And we know that there have been some people through the last 30, 40 years who did attempt to do it, who weren't from here, and they never grasped how the community is so involved with this.
Love their local sports. From that time, Mr. Barletta, what do you remember covering now in this point of your career? It's maybe at SSP TV. It's in the 90s. What's going on in the local sport? I know you mentioned Little League. It was number one. Was there anything else really?
Well, I think Fred would agree that the 93, the first year of the high school, when that team the basketball team advanced to the state final, the win over Chester. I mean, Fred could correct me if I'm wrong, but that had to be one of the most thrilling moments as a broadcaster. Just that whole era of basketball, and it was just culminant with that run. If you want to talk about that, Fred, that was.
I don't know, unless you lived through it, anybody could truly understand how the entire community was caught up in that. And it was the perfect thing. It was the start of the new school. It was the very first year of the merger of the three schools into the Hazleton area Cougars. And a lot of people going into that weren't so certain that it was going to work, that there was still going to be such passion and allegiance to the Whippets and the Wildcats and the Mountaineers that the community would not accept this new school. The football team came out and had a really nice season. That kind of set the tone. We played into playoffs, which we weren't used to doing in football, but then the basketball thing just blew it away. And, they lost the very first night to Carlisle, down at Carlisle in a tournament. And little did we know, they weren't going to lose again in the state championship game, which actually was in April that year. And the run and the excitement in this community, I've never seen anything like that before or since, to be quite honest. And it was, I'm just very fortunate that we were all part of that. It was wonderful. Wonderful.
So you're working in the school district at that point, right? And you're also working as a sports journalist. So you're kind of covering it, and you're inside the...
Broadcast every single game. Bruce Ellis and I broadcast every single basketball game that the Cougars played, from the very first one all the way through till I became the athletic director. And then Bruce continued on. But we worked together for, I believe it was 18 or 19 years, and we did every game. So yes, on that run that year, it was really something. As Dave mentioned, that Chester game was absolutely the highlight of the year. People forget there were the game at Hazleton against Bishop Holman went either one overtime or two overtimes, and people don't remember how good that Holman team was. They went deep in the playoffs, different classification. Chet Hine, wonderful coach, and it was unbelievable. But the state championship became kind of anticlimactic, namely because we didn't win. But the excitement, we thought we had a shot to win, and one of our key players got in foul trouble, and the team just didn't look the same. But that Chester game in the Eastern Final, I mean, this is Chester Clippers, come on. I mean, this is when they were the premier team in the state. And, to win on, Chester takes the last shot. Really good look. And you thought...
2 shots.
Yeah, right. And you're thinking, oh, boy, this close, and, the ball's leaving the hand, and you thought, oh, boy. But, the Cougars prevailed, and just fabulous. And ironically, the 2 games before the state title game were played at Hershey, at the Hershey Arena. So it had that real big time. It wasn't in another high school gym somewhere. So, great memory. Although, and Dave and I talk about this. In my heart of hearts, no offense to anybody on that 93 team, I still believe that the 2 best Bruce Leib teams didn't get to the state championship game. One was that Mountaineer team. Do I have to say Rap Curry? It still pains me.
Don't mention it to Richie Hudock.
And the other one, and you guys just did a feature on it, was the 95 team. I mean, as we said, we had a 15-point lead late in the first half. Like, you're thinking, oh, we're on our way. And I love the way you put down there the York game, and how everybody, that game was like a 1 o'clock game, and that Hatboro Horsham game at Martz Hall, everybody from Hazleton didn't come home to Hazleton. They went from York and stopped at Martz Hall. Who are we going to play? And
I remember, Freddie, you talking about the story too, like feeling like a little bit good about yourself, borderline cocky, like we're Hazleton.
Oh, we went in there with a little bit of we were strutting a little bit. We really were, like, Hazleton's here. I mean, I really thought we're going to be back in the state title game for the second time within a 3-year period.
Which is amazing when you think about it.
It really is. And I'm glad to see that team's being honored. But in my heart of hearts, I really believe they were the 2 best Bruce Leib teams. And then more recently, we had the Cougar team that lost in the Eastern Final to Lincoln. Really good team, but I still think that that Mountaineer team and the 95 team were the teams that had the best shot to win a state title.
I thought that the team that had the best shot, probably, you say 89, the Rap Curry game, they were undefeated going into that game. That was the Eastern semifinal, lost by 2 points. Game was tied. The Mountaineers had the ball, and a player named Rap Curry, who wound up being a star at St. Joseph's University, made a steal and got fouled and made 2 foul shots in the last few seconds. That's how the Mountaineers lost that game. But I still think the team before that, with Bob Krasansky, Jeff Antolik, Rich Hudock, Christian Fornataro, that team might have been better. Their unfortunate was they had to play against Billy Owens-led Carlisle. Carlisle won 4 straight state championships with Billy Owens, the great Billy Owens. I mean, mention Billy Owens to Bruce Leib, and I think he still gets shivers. But Billy Owens was a fantastic player, and 2 of the Mountaineers lost that year came at the hands of Carlisle. And I think if Carlisle wasn't part of the tournament, or Billy Owens wasn't part of the tournament, you might have been looking at a real dynasty, Hazleton basketball dynasty at that time.
I couldn't agree more. I tell people this. People will ask me, you've broadcast so many games and you've watched so many games, who was the best high school player you ever saw? And everybody's waiting for me to say Kobe Bryant, because Hazleton did play against Kobe, and I saw Kobe other times, non-Hazleton games. But my opinion is the best high school player I ever saw was named Billy Owens.
I agree.
And he was a star at Syracuse, and he did play in the NBA. Certainly not what Kobe Bryant turned out to be. But I'm not comparing Kobe Bryant, the legend. I'm Kobe Bryant at Lower Merion.
As a junior,
and even a senior, against Billy Owens as freshman, sophomore, junior. 4 years that young man was there. 4 state championships.
he had 50-some points in the state final his last game.
Yeah, I mean, he was, to me, he's the most dominating and best high school player I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's incredible that our local teams and athletes have gone up against some of these athletes and
That helped our kids.
Really pushed them.
Yeah, that really
pushed
helped
them.
our kids, definitely.
We just had a really interesting talk, Dave, on Dave Day. You could find it online. It was the most recent Dave Day, where we bring Dave in to talk on SSP TV News about Title IX. So Title IX, 1972, right around the time you were getting into sports journalism, and that you come on to cover sports around then. And also, I believe you coached girls track and field at Hazleton Area High School. How much did that change the local landscape? That's what we were talking about. Dave was talking about Bill Crooks and how women's and girls sports started to get more attention around here. They started to play at Mart's Hall. Did you see the same trend, and just how did you see the impact of that?
I can start by telling you, when I'm at Hazleton High School as a student and an athlete, the girls' basketball team, they wore skirts. Only 2 girls were allowed to shoot. The other girls were only allowed to pass the ball. Just stop and think about that.
Is there a reason for that?
Well, this went back. This was prior to Title IX. The thought was that, they're girls, for crying out loud. This is physical sports. I mean, there were hardly any sports for girls. I saw that landscape and actually was part of it. And I remember a former colleague at the Standard Speaker, and still a colleague to Dave, Rich Garcella. I still remember an article he wrote back in the early 80s called "Girls No Longer Belong on the Sidelines." And that was the thought. If you're a girl, be a cheerleader or something. Be in the pom-pom squad. You can't be in competitive sports. And I remember even with track, which I ended up coaching, I can remember older people, coaches, saying to me, "Are you really expecting girls to run for 2 miles? You're expecting them to throw a shot put. You're expecting them to," and I'm like, well, yeah, why not? But that was just the mentality. And Title IX, one of the great things to ever take place, celebrating its 50th year, and you just look at the sports landscape today and what girls' sports, particularly here in Hazleton, but from coast to coast, it's just amazing. And you see some of these female athletes and you think 50 years ago the thought was they could never do this.
What female athletes were you able to coach that you looked at and were like, wow, this? I'm sure there's a ton of them. I mean, that go back. But again, you think of the track and field team, the javelin champions that have been produced recently. But there's probably been so many. But I mean, who do you think of?
You got to think of the Teresa Lorenzi, I think.
Well, Teresa Lorenzi was one of the first great total athletes, like not only just one sport. She may not have been the best basketball player, and she may not have been the best track athlete. She's in the top, 5 or whatever. But she was one of the best athletes that I had ever seen. Kelly Hunt was a collegiate All-American in the Big Ten out at Penn State, and I was fortunate enough with her. Amy Mantush, who's going into the Luzerne County Hall of Fame. The Ritzes. You could talk about genetics, between Sandy Ritz and Rachel Ritz and Lynn Ritz. It was unbelievable how am I going to sit here and with Dave Seaman right here and set without, Jillian Seaman and, all of these girls that I'm mentioning, they all were Division I collegiate athletes, successful Division I collegiate athletes. And that is not easy to do. Even if you want to compare the male gender ones, it's really a small list of successful athletes that we have had that go on to compete at Division I collegiate levels. And the girls that have done this, Joy Gallagher comes to mind. I didn't coach Joy. She was a softball player. You start talking softball players.
She played 2 sports, too.
She played 2 sports. I tell people, just my humble opinion, Marissa Tribalpiece might be the best softball player I've ever seen in this area, and out at Michigan State. And she had a couple sisters that were pretty good, but this one, to me, I think is the best softball player I've ever seen. So that list goes on and on and on. And now, like you said, javelin, Julie Franzosa wins the state championship, which we thought, wow, might never see that again. Well, we did see it again. And, Kayla Merkel just missed one on the last throw, or we would have had a 3rd state champion. And, Abby now just graduated, has a state championship under her belt. It's just amazing to me. And I kind of just smile when I think how many people questioned it back in the late 70s. Girls aren't going to be able to do this.
It's incredible to see as well. And I was telling you, Dave, born in 1984, and just even the interactions with sports. I went to Holy Spirit Academy, legendary. Coach Ross there helped the boys basketball team, and we won a CYO title. And I think the girls team won the same year. And that summer before 7th grade, we were all at a party together, getting ready to go to Bishop Hayfie. And the girls team challenged some of the guys to a game, and they annihilated the group of guys who were there. And I'll never forget that. And there never was a question really with my generation in that of should they be out here playing with us? Should they? It was just we got to enjoy it. The Hayfie soccer team, we used to scrimmage the girls team when we had time, and that was one thing we really enjoyed doing. Covering it from the other standpoint, was it always? You said, Dave, it kind of grew, but as we think about the attention the Hazleton area softball program gets when they go to 2 state championship games, the spotlight really has shown on them. Did you see that change over time as well?
It gradually took place, but the thing that I always gauged it by, and this happened not right off the bat in the late 70s or early 80s, but by the late 80s and into the early 90s, if a girls' team was doing well, all of a sudden the crowds, it were some of the same fans that were coming out for the boys' sports. And a great analogy would be basketball. You would see people, if a Hazleton team was playing for the District 2 championship or going into state playoffs, you would see some of the exact same fans who were coming out for the boys' games, and I'm thinking that never would have happened before. Dave will remember this, and I point this out to people. When Hazleton made the switch from District 11 to District 2 and into the Wyoming Valley Conference, pretty good in the Lehigh Valley. We played winter sports down there. So the girls' basketball played down there. It was pretty rugged. When we moved up to the Wyoming Valley Conference, girls' sports, including girls' basketball, were played at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They didn't even play them in prime time. And that's because nobody went to the games. But that's certainly not the case now. And, if you have a good girls' team, you see the fans come out and the excitement come out no different than if it was a good boys' team. And that was true with softball. People wanting to get on that bandwagon and where's the softball team playing? And you guys covered it. You saw the crowds. Looked very similar to baseball.
One of my favorite memories doing this job was, and I don't remember, you guys have such great memories, it's wonderful, but I was at a state playoff game with the Hazleton area girls basketball team, Joe Gavio. I think it was at Reading High School. I remember there was a night in the gym. There was a big night, a suit of armor up there, and the intensity in that gym was a lot of fun. Do you remember when this was or what it was?
2009, that might have been Alaska Flanagan's senior year. Okay. I believe they played one of the Downingtown teams.
Played Downingtown East, I believe it was. Yeah, it was Downingtown because
Bob Schnorr's team. It was Bob
Schnorr, legendary girls coach. And yes, that was down at the Geigel. That's true. And you're right, Dave. That was the team. They had a very veteran team for like 4-year run. Joe started. He brought a lot of freshmen up, and Flanagan was probably the best one. But I believe that was Ashley Grimm. And
No, Ashley Grimm would have been a few years before.
was before her. Was that Jenna Palumbo?
Jenna Palumbo was Ashley Grimm. This would have been Maddie Ludwig, Chris
Okay.
Retta.
Right. There you go.
Jenna Montone was on that team.
Correct.
I just remember it, and I always said this, and I'd love to do. We have to get Joe Gavio on the podcast because I always love.
I don't think we'd have enough time.
I say it's almost like you're the energy circuit, and it would just like I would watch him on the sideline or on the baseline there going crazy, and then that was one moment where I just looked around the gym, and it was like he was where all the power was coming from, and you just saw it go into the stands. Then that was really an exciting run.
I just have to tell you, and you guys will appreciate this because you've had to interview him. I had a member of the media from out of the area, and they said to me, this was at a basketball event, and they said, your coach want to talk to your coach, and I said, yeah. I said, I'll get him, I'll set it up. They said, it won't be much. I have like 4 questions to ask, and I said, that's not going to work. And they just looked at me, and I said, 1. I said, because you asked that one question,
That's all you need.
that's all you're going to need. And you guys know what I'm talking about, how Joe is. So.
Yeah, I usually tell interns, I'll say, get your important questions up here. I said, he'll probably answer everything in one question. I said, but make sure
You might not find it right away what you're looking for.
you'll be running out of storage space on your card and that. Before we hit our second break, Mr. Barletta, and then go into the final segment, I wanted to ask you about this. One thing I've been floored by, I mean, I didn't grow up around high school sports as much as both of you did. I played soccer at HAHS, but I wasn't going to the games a lot and that. I do remember being little and my uncle taking me to a lot of the Mountaineer basketball games at St. Joe's. But what's really, I love doing this. I don't think I'd ever want to do anything else because of the high school athletes. I'm always so impressed by them. You've worked with them in the school as student athletes. I mean, in losses, I'm so impressed by how they handle themselves. When I hear what they do off the court, when I go to the unified track, which we're going to get into with the special needs kids and non-special needs kids working together on a team, and I see the Hazleton Area High School baseball team there supporting them. And after, one thing that really stuck with me, after the loss in the state playoffs this year for the Hazleton Area baseball team, I was going over to talk with Russ Kanzler, coach, and right before I did, someone grabbed him, and I think you might have been around there, Mr. Barletta, and said, you do this the right way. The Hazleton team does this the right way, and said, really congratulated on just how the players carry themselves. As an educator, but also as an athletic director and former coach, how much does that mean to you that these kids in the Hazleton Area School District and the other school districts as well, but when you hear a story like that?
That's at the top of the list. That's probably the most important thing, because one of the things you have to do as an athletic director, we all love sports. We all want to win. However, it's scholastic sports. They're student athletes. And, you talk about Title IX. One of the other things that is so antiquated now, the old image, the dumb jocks. I'm the one responsible every Friday for checking the grades. And you know this because we've talked about it. Every now and then, media will come up and say, why isn't so-and-so playing tonight? And I have to point out that they're on academic suspension for the week. And we do that. I have to tell you, that is probably 1%, I don't know if less than 1% of the student athletes that we have to sit down. The majority of our student athletes are not only making that criteria and passing, they're in the distinguished graduates. They're in the National Honor Society. It's something I'm very, very proud of in that regard. Secondly is how you carry yourself as a person. And I can go on and tell you stories. You guys covered the unified thing. I actually had to turn away. I kind of got a little teary-eyed. We didn't do this ourselves. The baseball team did. Russ Kanzler, and they had the baseball team there at the first unified track meet. And here are our kids on that unified team. Majority of them are special needs kids. And the baseball team got around them at the beginning and, cheering them on and said, now listen, this is what we do right before we go out. You got to get around. We're going to put our hands in here and we're going to say, on 3, let's go Cougars. And these kids, to see the look on their face, and I'm thinking, my baseball players get it. They get it. Football team going down and volunteering time at Catholic Charities. Our girls volleyball team going down and volunteering time to help clean up a playground. When I see things like this, the wrestling team going down to a food pantry, and these are things sometimes that people don't see. And it's very important, Kenny, very important to see that. And this happens as much as I could ever hope for.
I think that's a great way to wrap up the segment. And I will say, speaking of student athletes, I remember interviewing the girls golf team. I think it was 2 years in a row they had the valedictorian was on the girls golf team, and also very successful that girls golf team as well. We'll be right back with our final segment here on Good Sports. The Good Sports podcast and web series is brought to you by the Lehigh Valley Health Network. Welcome back to the Good Sports podcast and web series. Ken Carey, SSP TV Sports Director, here with Dave Seaman, Standard Speaker, Sports Editor, and Fred Barletta Jr. He's the Athletic Director at the Hazleton Area High School, sports journalist in the area for a number of years, also coached sports in the area, and was a teacher in the Hazleton Area School District. Before we jump in, because I want to hear about you covering the World Series and all these great national sports stories, but as we were having a talk in the break here, the Hazleton's community has changed. The Hispanic population has boomed. Joe Madden did the Hazleton Integration Project, and Joe would always say, hey, it's really with the kids, and the more the kids hang out together, the community is going to come together. You see these teams now. How much do you think sports has played a role into? I go to these games and I hear some of the kids speaking Spanglish to each other, Spanish and English, and they set such a great example for the area, and sports seems to really have played an important role in that.
I'm certainly biased in this. I think it's played one of the huge roles in the community, and certainly, in my opinion, the largest in our school district. Yes, we have all witnessed the demographic change over the last 20 years. And see, we know this from covering sports, from playing sports. Your athletes really don't care. They want to know if you have game. Yep. That's it. If you've got game and you're a good guy, they want to be buddies with you. They want to hang with you. They want to communicate with you. And there is no better vehicle than scholastic athletics to do that. Because, again, in the classroom, we've all been in those as well. There really is minimal interaction between the kids. You're listening to the teacher, maybe a little bit in gym class, maybe when you go to lunch. But kids have a tendency in those situations to hang with their own element. And I'm not only talking here demographics, I'm talking about even size, the way they're dressed. That's just the nature of it. Athletics transcends all of that. It really does. Because, see, everybody's wearing that same uniform. And again, can you help this team? And if you can help the team, nobody cares what your background is. Nobody cares what your financial situation is. No one cares what your skin color is. They want to be with you because you can help. You're one of us, team. And it's you have to see it. And I really feel sorry for those individuals that don't understand that. And unfortunately, we do have people in the community, and we've even had some in leadership positions that don't get that.
Going now to more national things. Speaking of that, one day I came in to do a story on Matthew Casadas, and Mr. Barletta set it all up for me. The Reds were playing the Red Sox in 2022, and we got on the subject of the 1975 World Series. And he said, oh, yeah, I covered that. And I was like, oh, cool. And he went over to his laptop, boop, boop, boop. And I forget who the picture was with. Was it with who was the picture you had on the field?
I'm not sure which one I showed you. I have photos there from Louis Tiant, Dwight Evans, Carl Yastrzemski, Pete Rose. If you're there as a journalist, you try to be objective and everything, but I'm not going to pose for a picture with Carlton Fisk. So even though he became one of the headliners of that series, but it might have been the one I showed you, because a lot of them they're just posing. But Louis Tiant, we developed a little bit of friendship and threw his arm around me and everything, and it's one of my favorite pictures. He's a really good man, and ironically, he ends up coming to Hazleton 40 years later, and I showed him that photo, and he started laughing, and we were telling some stories, and so it had to be one of those. I think it might have been the El Tiante.
What was he doing in Hazleton? What's he come to Hazleton for?
He was here with the hip with Joe Madden.
Was he really?
Yep. He was here one year. I don't recall what year it was, but he was among the bevy of big-name athletes that have been here for that. And one year, El Tiante came in.
What's some of your favorite memories? You're a big Yankees fan. I'm sure I think you showed me some photos from Yankee Stadium as well. As you look back on that time in your career when you go into all these national events, what really sticks out?
I was pretty fortunate to be doing that at a young age. And again, it was different then. I don't even know if they would permit this then. I was the sports director up at the college station, and I was friends with the late Ray Saul, Dave's predecessor, and you had to know how Ray was and the professionalism to him. And these guys, I got to go to these events years before this, and then I would have a ticket to go to the game, and they would all be down on the field. And then when that took place, I asked him, and they told me at that time how you applied for credentials. And lo and behold, I was accepted. And so I got to go down and be part of that, and be in locker rooms and on the field. Well, how do you ever draw this up? The 75 World Series, one of the classic World Series of all time. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that. And that's backed up in 76, 7, 8, the World Series is in New York. 79, the World Series is in Baltimore. 1980, it's in Philadelphia. 81, it's in New York again. So I'm not going to be able to go to World Series games out in Chicago or St. Louis or Cincinnati. We had a run there from 1975 through 1981 where the World Series was within driving distance of Hazleton. So it was just luck that happened, and right place at the right time.
I want to ask you this too, Dave. You could think about it maybe while Mr. Barletta responds. I can't see you being nervous, Mr. Barletta, but has there been an interview in your life where you were a little, maybe in your younger days, you're going to the World Series, was there a moment when you were a little nervous?
The only two people that I can remember being nervous about, one was Mickey Mantle, who was my idol as a kid. And I never did an interview with him, but just being there and walking through the tunnels of Yankee Stadium pregame, like from where the dining lunch area is, and there's Mickey Mantle. It stopped me on a dime. I could feel my breath being taken away, and like, should I say something to him? Should I, not even realizing, take a shot, ask him for an interview? And the other one was the very first time that I ever was out at Beaver Stadium for a press conference with Joe Paterno. Larger than life figures, to say the least, and two people that I always had admired and looked up to.
I remember asking Joe Paterno, was the one thing I wanted to do throughout all my career was I could probably, and I would retire now and be happy, was ask Joe Paterno a question. And my first time in that Beaver Stadium press conference room, in the press room, and me being a soccer guy, I've always admired special teams. And Penn State had some great defense and special teams that really held them in during some of the lean years, Dave. The punter would bury the other team deep, and then the defense would hold, and then they'd lose to Iowa like 6-4. But it kept them in a lot of games, and I asked Joe about the punting and special teams, and I was so nervous. And he goes into this great answer, and then he went, but what do I want to talk about punting for? Who wants to punt? And then he started joking around, and I got red-faced and nervous. But that, to this day, is a great story. And the other time I remember, just twice, like basically I think I blacked out. But sometimes sometimes it happens so fast, you don't even realize. The one hip event for the Hazleton Integration Project, Yogi Berra was there. And they said, you can go in, just interview him while he's signing. You can ask like 2 questions of that while he's signing autographs. And I'm overwhelmed. And I just remember him being so friendly. And I couldn't believe how accommodating, because he was older at this point. People are coming at him and signing. And he was so patient. But I think I blacked out. I don't even remember what I asked. And Manny Ramirez was at another hip event. And as a big Red Sox fan, that was another one. Like you said with Mickey Mantle, like he was just hanging out there. And I was like, I spent 5 minutes being like, how do I go over and ask? All right, I have to do it before I leave. And he was gracious enough to do an interview as well. How about you, Dave, when you look at your career?
When I had to interview Darryl Strawberry, was on a rehab assignment. He was with the Yankees at the time, and he was taking batting practice at the old Lackawanna Stadium, now PNC Field. And I just in awe, him hitting home runs off this, over the center field fence, well over the center field fence. And so if you've been to a major league or minor league game, you wait behind a batting cage, and then he was going to talk to people. Well, I wanted to be the first one there to interview him. So I walked up to him, not realizing he still had another round or two of batting practice to go. And Jorge Posada, who was a minor leaguer at the time or something, came, let the man bleep and hit. And I just remember, okay, and I didn't realize who it was, but it was Jorge Posada. And as Freddie's a Yankee fan would know, the competitiveness in Jorge Posada. And, I respect him as a player, Jorge Posada, but I never really liked him. But for him to do that, and then I understood where my ground was, and then I just went about and watched Darryl, put a bunch more balls over the fence in center field, and it was a treat to watch, but I learned a lesson along the way.
Two things along those lines. I probably told this story on the podcast before, but I don't know if I ever told you, Mr. Barletta. One of the first times when I went down to cover the Rays, Don Zimmer was on the bench then I think a bench coach for Joe Maddon at that point. And I was in the dugout. It was like one of my first times at covering a major league game. And I went over and I was like, Mr. Zimmer, do you mind if I talk with you? And he was, nah, and he was, and then we were both just sitting there in silence. And he looked over at me and said, where are you from? And I said, oh, Hazleton. He was like, Hazleton, Joe Matt, Joe's hometown. I said, yeah. And he did this very long interview with me. It was great. And the other time, Mr. Barletta, another Yankee story. Listen, I have really admired a ton of Yankees. Derek Jeter, I mean, a lot of the Yankees just had to appreciate, even as a Red Sox fan, just to watching them. And since we have the farm club here in Scranton Wilkes-Barre now, we get to know some of the guys. Gleyber Torres was great. I loved covering him. I think he hit a home run to beat the Red Sox a few years ago. I was like, but what a good guy. And I'll never forget, A-Rod was the one Yankee was always hard for me to cheer for. Just was always hard for me to cheer for. And Russ Kanzler was playing up, I think he was still playing for Durham when A-Rod was doing a rehab assignment at Scranton Wilkes-Barre. And I went to the press conference with A-Rod, and I thought, I'll get some audio. And finally, like, the questions were wrapping up, and I thought, let me just ask. And I said, hey, there's a young baseball player here playing for Durham who's from the area. What advice would you give him? And A-Rod knew Russ's name and pegged it and was so... I liked A-Rod. There I was like, now I'm an A-Rod fan as well. So it's incredible when you get to see these guys, maybe from a different angle.
Yeah, and it works the other way. Sometimes the guys that you think are not going to be easy to talk to are, yeah. And some guys who you think they are not very good.
They don't want any of your business to take.
Right, and particularly when you're from a small outlet like all of us are. That happens, but it's amazing. But you always try it, just as you did, as you said there. You look for the local angle. I remember the first time I interviewed Mike Messina, and I'm thinking, they say he's really cerebral guy, a Stanford grad and everything, and found out he really is. And I'm thinking, how do I approach this? And I went up. I said, I'd be able to get a word with you. I said, I think we're the only two guys standing in Yankee Stadium who have ever been to the Bloomsburg Fair. And he just snapped and he said, the Bloomsburg Fair? Yeah. He said, and he said, where are you from? And, it started, and I said, yeah. I said, I guess I could throw Knoebels in too. And he started laughing. And that kind of broke the ice. And we started in great interview. Joe Girardi, he's managing the Yankees, and I went up to him and I said, I think we may have a mutual friend. And they always look at you that, and I said, Brian McCann, they came up through the Cubs system together when Brian was a trainer. And he just stopped and he says, Doc, how do you know Doc? And we started. And so sometimes you have to try to, just what you said you did with A-Rod. I mean, so it's interesting. Sometimes you're happy that you're there, and sometimes you say, boy, I wish I wasn't here, because now I look at a guy totally different.
Fred, we did talk. One question I do have for you. You talked about your dad's influence. Obviously, you've had influence on your own sons and daughter in sports and everything. Could you talk about that? I mean, that's always good to share, too, your love for sports with your own kids.
Well, I think just reversed it. I became what my dad was to me and my brothers, and never forced it on him. I was never one to force any of my kids to play. My daughter, I was a track coach, and she had some athletic ability. She was the MVP of the CYO League when she was in 7th grade or 6th grade, and I was bringing her to track practices, and I could see she could do some stuff. She wanted no parts of it. And I was not one to force them. I just never have believed in that. But all of them do have a passion and a love for sports. And ironically, not the same teams. The New York Football Giants is the only team that everybody in my family agrees on. When it comes to baseball, my oldest son, who I love him dearly, but he can't stand the Yankees. I'm thinking he's taken up for my father. And the worst is he doesn't even like the Red Sox, which is, class franchise. I mean, who really roots for the Seattle Mariners for crying out loud?
Especially of his generation. I would think like Ken Griffey Jr. and that. You're like, okay, but that was probably before him.
No, that's the whole.
Was that his?
He's a junior guy. Okay. Yes, and I mean to this day he's still. And we went up when Griffey was inducted in the Hall of Fame. I promised him that I said when he gets in, and I knew he would, obviously. That's it. But you would think that after Griffey left, you would say, okay. Enough. But he still holds out hope. But
I think that's one of the reasons that I don't have kids yet. I always tell my wife, and maybe you guys could give me advice. I say, what if they don't like Penn State? What if they start rooting for Michigan, or they're like
Yankees?
Or worse. I mean, what do you do?
There's one of them. None of my kids are Penn State fans. None of them. And but the ironic part, the most passionate fan is my daughter. Yeah. I mean, she gets crazy. And I'm like, oh boy. And she lives in Philadelphia, and she sends me pictures waving Giants. I said, no, don't do that. Don't do that when you go out at night.
As a father, worry, but especially in that situation in Philly.
It's fun. I don't know that I'd still be a season ticket holder to the Giants if it wasn't for my family. I honestly mean this. As much fun as it is watching the games, I enjoy being there because they drive long distances every Sunday, and it becomes a family thing, and that's a lot of fun.
Well, I'll tell you, and I say this, and I'm a little crazy with Penn State football too, but it comes from, that's, my dad was the biggest, he loved Penn State football. And my uncles, and once my dad passed away and my uncles would take me to the games, as I've gone older, that's what I appreciate now. Like my dad sat in Beaver Stadium, the same stadium, where I was, and my uncles passed that love on to me, and now I'm passing it on to my little cousins. And it shows, sports goes beyond just, hey, you won, you lost, you remember this. It's the relationships, Dave, I've been blessed to build with you, Mr. Barletta, and with your families.
And I just have to throw one thing, and I appreciate what you just said. But I was thinking of this. They live far away, and I'm saying, who lives in Baltimore, who lives in Philly. They make it a point, like when the baseball team just made the run and the softball team did, and if basketball, they will say, like, well, where are they playing here if I come home on the weekend? Are there any Saturday games? And that's their high school. And it's really fun that they still haven't lost that they're still Cougar fans.
It's got to be interesting for the generation that grew up with the different high schools to now see that it's been 30 years? Has it been 30 years of the Hazleton area high school? There is now, two generations that only know the Hazleton area high school and that only were Cougars, and that is their situation, is that is my high school, that is, and that's how they've grown up.
Yeah, it's been a different. It was an adjustment period, I think, for all of us. I mean, all of us, grew up watching the Mountaineers and the Whippets and the Wildcats, and even like the Bishop Hayfie teams of years past, and the generation before us too grew up with the old Anthracite League too, when you had St. Gabriel's playing, and you had the Foster Township and St. Anne's, and McAdoo High School. The pride over there is still, you go to an old timer from McAdoo, still talk about their school in glowing terms, and that's how we were with our schools. But I think it's been a big adjustment. I think the area has come to grips with it. I think it did take a while though, but I think sports had a big part in the area accepting the high school. You're going to find some people that still are a little bit bitter not having their high school, but I think as we've gone on over the last 30 years, sports has played a huge part in this.
And it's interesting how things always continue to evolve. And we say, is it better? Is it worse? Is it just evolution? Is it just different? Talking about, like, I remember growing up, the Berwick football game was, and not that it's not. I mean, it's still, a big thing. But when I interview athletes now and I hear them talk about Crestwood and how, that rivalry, on 309 has really blossomed. I forget who I was talking to recently, and I said the word Crestwood. And jokingly, they were like, oh, that was a big one. As we wrap things up, Dave, let's do it like we always do with our good sport moment, something that's made us, proud to and happy to do our jobs. What's your good sport moment for
I'm gonna go in Freddie's office. I don't know if he would. I'm gonna mention Leanne Fisher, because Leanne Fisher is the most bubbly personality of anybody you want to meet. Go to a softball game, she's there. She's doing the score, keeping the scorebook. Always has a pleasant conversation for you. She's on top of all the athletes coming through there. You want a schedule copied. You want to talk to Mr. Barletta or something like that. He's not in today. He's at a meeting or something like that. Is there anything I can help you with? I just like that ability of someone to be helpful and always there. And I know Fred mentions her all the time. When he has something to do, she's right in the middle of it. And her work is invaluable. Especially for what we do if we need something. And I'm happy to call her as a friend as well.
I think I speak with her more than you, Mr. Barletta, sometimes. I do call, and she knows right where you are, and also, hey, and she'll help too. Hey, this athlete, they're in this period, and maybe we could hook this up. So yeah, definitely a huge help. I'm going to go, I'll ask Mr. Barletta, and I'll wrap it up. Do you have any good sports moments? I mean, as athletic director, you mentioned a bunch of them, but you mentioned your Cougar Works program within the Hazleton Area School District. I think that's what you call it, or Cougars in the Community.
Yeah, Cougars in the Community, something I'm very proud of, but, we did mention that. I was thinking when you asked me to think of ones about Leanne, and Dave stole that one, and I kind of know what yours is, so I won't steal that on you because it is something that I'm very proud of. I'll let you handle that. I'm going to go to the complete opposite end of things. This past weekend, believe it or not, I was at a football game. It was a 16-team scrimmage down in the Lehigh Valley at Whitehall High School. And Hazleton was part of it, so it was a Saturday. I figured, let me take a ride down there. And my wife, Paula, and I went down and wanted an early glimpse of the Cougars, 7-on-7 scrimmage. And the athletic director from Whitehall, good friend Bob Hartman, texted me, he said, where are you at? He said, come over by the field house. I want you to meet someone. And I go over, and it's Saquon Barkley. Well, my good guy one goes to this. I just watched him the rest of the day. Here's a man who reached all types of heights on the college and the professional level. He's back at his high school, and he interacted with the kids. I turn around, and he's on the sidelines where Whitehall is playing. He's not coaching, but he's pumping his fists, and he's high-fiving kids. He took photos, including with our own Hazleton Cougars. He took photos, like a team photo. All our team was there, and he's right in the middle of it. And he did that with numerous teams that were there. I did not see him turn down anybody's request, any of the kids, and he wanted to be out there with the kids. And I'm thinking, we just said some athletes do it the right way, some don't. We've had a couple in the Hazleton area. None reached the height of Saquon Barkley. That's what happens when you're brought up the right way. And I had always heard stories that he was a class act. He was. And I think that's a wonderful example for every one of those Hazleton Cougars and all the other 15 teams that were there. And I don't know that he's going to be listening to the podcast, but he needs a shout out.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, he's one I'd be nervous to interview right now. I'm a huge Saquon Barkley fan, obviously as a Penn State fan, but also as a human being, like you mentioned. I think there was that famous story, I'll probably screw up right now, but when he was in high school, or he won the track, or there was a girl who won the year before, didn't win the next year, got hurt or something, and Saquon won and gave her the medal. And you've heard several stories like that with Saquon Barkley. My good sports moment goes to the Hazleton Area High School Unified Track and Field team. I wasn't even aware of this, Mr. Barletta. I mean, when they contacted me about this story and they said, hey, this is a PIAA sport, it's special needs kids without special needs, they're on the same team. And really, I mean, it's just the whole atmosphere. I would encourage you, Google it, read the article the Standard Speaker did. We did a sports story on SSP TV. WYLN was there, I believe maybe 16, and WBRE were there. Look at them all. Just watch them all and take it in from all those different angles, because that's really what you have to see. And it was just the kids telling me how they were learning from each other on the team. We've already mentioned the support that the baseball team. There was a great interview we did with one of the coaches who said, leaving the career center that day, there was a line of kids applauding as the athletes were leaving, and she said that brought a tear to her eye. There's few stories I walk away from after I'm done, asking all the questions, and I go in my car and I well up a little bit, and you think of, wow, I'm so proud to be from this area, and I'm so proud that there are people like this who are really making this work, and it's incredible to see. And I was grabbing kids. I didn't know when I was going to do the interviews if they had special needs, if they didn't have special needs. It was just everybody on equal ground, and it was incredible to see. And one student told me, who had autism, how much it was helping him and how much he loved athletics and wanted to be on a team. And this was a dream come true during his senior year. And to see that many people from the community show up as well, I mean, it was loud there, was something really special.
Well, as I said, both you guys stole thunder of ones that I was considering. Two great choices, but Leanne is wonderful. I can't even describe this, ditto everything Dave said, but that unified team, Kenny, I appreciate you acknowledging that. This is one of the proudest things I've ever been part of in my entire educational career of 44 years, was watching what that turned into. And it's a winner in every sense of the word. And I just appreciate what you guys did with giving the publicity. And it's nice to hear both of you say that about the unified team and Leanne, that the behind-the-scenes things, that you're aware of that. I really appreciate that.
So many good things happen in our area, Dave. We're happy we just get to be a part of it and celebrate them. I'll have one more extra good sports moment. Going upon your Cougars in the community program, I mentioned when I was at the Independence Day celebration, there was the Cougar football team. I just looked around. I was like, hey, Coach Dennis Bookman was there. I said, are some of your players here? Yeah, they were handing out waters during the race. And actually, Tyler Wolf, when I was talking with him, quarterback for the team, he said, I got promoted this year. I was on park and car duty last year. This year I'm here. So happy. And they said, hey, these are the same people coming to support us in the stands. And it means a lot to them to go out there and help out in their community. Mr. Barletta, I know how busy you are. We've been in the office, Dave. You see 6A high school athletic department. Just to take some time and come in today and share some of your stories and your passion for the sports community, how generous you were throughout my career and with all of the athletes and students you work with now. Thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure to have the opportunity to sit down with our A-list sports journalists in this community is a thrill. It really is. I just appreciate everything you guys do for Scholastic Sports, and thanks for the invite.
Dave, it's an honor. I said I felt like one of the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders who's batting like 150, and the Yankees were in a tough spot, and they're like, just call them up. And then I meet like Stanton and Judge, and here I am. So I appreciate it.
No problem at all. It's always been a pleasure to work with you and talk sports in the community, and there's nobody better in the community than Fred Barletta right now.
Well, this is it for the latest edition of Good Sports. Thank you all for watching. Remember, you can check it out on the Standard Speaker's website, on SSP TV's website. You could download the podcast. You could stream the web series where you see all the video. Hopefully, maybe Mr. Barletta could send me some of the cool photos he was talking about. I think I saw a photo with some of the Hazleton area football team with Saquon Barkley. That's why when you started telling that story, it's like, I saw Saquon on Facebook. Thank you so much all for joining us. Until next time, take it easy and be a good sport. The Good Sports podcast and web series is brought to you by the Lehigh Valley Health Network. Thanks for joining us.